The storm had scoured the valley for 3 hours before the rain softened to a gray drizzle. Eleanor Ashby pulled her woolen shawl tighter and stepped carefully along the rutted lane that led to the river. She always walked the boundary after a heavy blow. The old footbridge near the mill was sound, but the stone carriage bridge half a mile upstream had been crumbling since winter, and another gale might have finished it. She came through the dripping hazel copse and stopped. A man on horseback was descending the opposite slope, picking his way through the mist that clung to the heather. He rode a tall black gelding with a coat like wet silk, and his cloak billowed behind him. Even at a distance she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the way he held the reins with one gloved hand, the other resting on his thigh as if he had ridden 100 miles and meant to ride 100 more. He was heading directly for the broken bridge. Eleanor's heart lurched. She gathered her skirts and ran along the ridge, waving her arm. "Stop, sir, you must stop." The rider slowed but did not halt. His head lifted. She stumbled down the bank, her boots skidding on wet grass, and planted herself in the path that led to the bridge's mouth. "The arch is shattered. There is nothing beneath but rocks and the current. Please, do not go further." He reined in at last, the horse tossing its head. Up close, he was not young, perhaps 30, with a lean face shadowed by a day's growth of beard and dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, a deep gray, studied her with unnerving stillness. "You are certain?" His voice was low and roughened by weather. "I live less than a quarter-mile from here. The center stones fell during the March floods. The parish set a warning post, but the storm washed it away." She gestured toward the mossy coping stones that jutted into the churning water. "If you had urged your horse onto that span, you would be dead." He dismounted, landing with a soft grunt, and walked to the edge. For a long moment he gazed into the chasm where water foamed white around shattered masonry. When he turned back, his expression had altered. Something private and grim passed behind his eyes. "I owe you a debt," he said. "What is your name?" "Eleanor Ashby. My father and I live at the river cottage." "Ashby?" He tested the name as if searching for a memory. "And who is responsible for maintaining this bridge?" "The Duke of Ashworth owns this land." She hesitated. "But he has not been seen in the county for 5 years. The steward sends promises." His mouth tightened. "And you stand guard in the meantime, warning strangers." "There are not many strangers here. You are the first in months." He almost smiled. "I am honored, then." He looked at the ford she pointed out further downstream, where the water ran shallow over gravel. "Will you show me the crossing?" She walked with him, keeping a careful distance. His cloak smelled of damp wool and horses and something else, a hint of sandalwood that clung to the lining. He did not speak, but his silence was not empty. It felt attentive, as if he were memorizing everything about her: the worn cuffs of her dress, the mud on her hem, the way she held her chin. At the ford he mounted again. "Miss Ashby, I am newly arrived in this country. Perhaps we shall meet again." "If you stay, you will learn that not much happens here," she said. "But you are welcome at the cottage if you ever require direction." He inclined his head, a gesture that might have been a bow from a man less exhausted. Then he urged the black gelding through the shallows and up the far bank, disappearing into the mist. Eleanor stood in the drizzle, her pulse still uneven. She had forgotten to ask his name. She walked home slowly. The cottage chimney was smoking, a thin gray plume, and inside her father sat by the fire with a book he was not reading. She told him about the stranger, the near disaster at the bridge. "A traveler," he frowned. "Did he give a name?" "No, but his horse was fine-bred, and he spoke like a gentleman." Her father's frown deepened. "The Duke had a son who went abroad. They say he is the new Duke now, though we have heard nothing official. If he has returned." Eleanor set the kettle on the hob. She did not mention the glove she had found in the mud where the stranger had stood, a riding glove of soft chestnut leather, still warm from his hand. She had picked it up without thinking. Now she turned it over in her pocket, and her fingertips brushed a crest embroidered inside the cuff. A falcon with wings spread, clutching a coronet. Morning light did little to warm the cottage, but it cleared the mist enough for Eleanor to see Ashworth Hall in the distance, a gray silhouette on the ridge. She had never been inside its gates. Her father had served the old Duke faithfully, and their reward had been disgrace. She walked to the village with the glove wrapped in a clean handkerchief. The high street was buzzing. Mrs. Tippet, the baker's wife, leaned across the counter before Eleanor could speak. "You have not heard. The Duke has come home. Arrived last evening half drowned and riding alone, no carriage, no servants. Can you imagine, a Duke?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. The Duke of Ashworth. Who else? Alexander Montford. They say he has been in Italy, Vienna, all sorts of places. Handsome, they say, but fierce. Mrs. Tippet lowered her voice. Old Martha from the hall kitchen says he sent for the account books before he even took off his wet coat. Eleanor left the shop without buying anything. The glove in her pocket felt heavier. She had warned a duke. She had stood in the rain and lectured a duke about his own broken bridge. She walked up the long drive to the hall, past neglected hedges and a fountain choked with dead leaves. The great house rose before her, its windows like blank eyes. She lifted the heavy iron knocker and let it fall. The butler who answered was elderly and suspicious. Eleanor held out the glove. "I believe this belongs to the Duke of Ashworth. He dropped it near the river last evening." Before the butler could reply, a voice came from the dim corridor behind him. "Who is it, Grimsby?" The butler stiffened. "A young woman, your grace. She claims to have found your glove." Eleanor heard footsteps, and then he was there, the stranger from the bridge, but transformed. He was clean-shaven now, his dark hair brushed back, and he wore a coat of deep blue wool that fitted his shoulders like it had been made for him, which it had. His gray eyes found hers, and this time the stillness in them was not the weariness of travel but the guarded composure of a man who had learned to reveal nothing. "Miss Ashby." He took the glove, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "You are far more efficient than my steward. He lost the bridge entirely." She could not stop the flush that rose to her cheeks. "I did not realize last night." "How could you?" He gestured for her to enter. "Please. I was hopping to find a reason to speak with you again. You mentioned your father." The entrance hall was cold, the marble floor veined with damp. He led her into a smaller parlor where a fire had been hastily lit. He did not sit behind the desk but leaned against it, arms folded, watching her with that attentive quiet. "You said your father lives with you at the River Cottage. Is he Edmund Ashby, who was once steward here?" She lifted her chin. "He is. He was dismissed by the previous Duke's agent for mismanagement." "Mismanagement." The Duke repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "I have been reading the estate ledgers since 4 this morning. There are discrepancies that stretch back a decade. I would like to hear your father's account." Eleanor's heart hammered. Why would you believe him? Everyone in the village believes he was a thief. "I do not know what I believe yet." He straightened. "But I know that you stood in the rain to save a stranger's life. That kind of character does not grow in a house without honor. Will you take me to him?" She could not refuse. She told herself it was because he was the Duke and she had no choice, but it was not true. It was because of the way he looked at her, as if she were not invisible. He walked with her back through the village, past staring faces, past Sir Reginald Finch, who stood outside the inn with his thumbs hooked in his waistcoat and his small eyes narrowing at the sight of them together. Eleanor felt the weight of the baronet's gaze like a warning. At the cottage gate the Duke paused. "I am sorry for the state of the road. I shall see it repaired." "The bridge matters more." "The bridge, yes." He looked toward the river. "Show me again what is broken, after I have spoken with your father." She opened the cottage door. Her father rose from his chair, and the color drained from his face. Edmund Ashby's hand shook on the back of the chair. He stared at the Duke as though a ghost had stepped through the door. You are the very likeness of your father." The Duke halted. "You knew my father." "I served him for 22 years. The old man's voice cracked. "I served him and he destroyed me. What do you want now? Have you come to turn us out of the cottage too?" "Papa," Eleanor went to him, but he shook her off. "I have come to understand what happened," the Duke said quietly. "I was 17 when I left England. My father and I were not on speaking terms. I knew nothing of the estate's affairs, and when he died, I received a letter from his solicitor informing me of the title and nothing more. No explanation, no inventory of wrongs. I have been reading the books. I see payments recorded that were never made, repairs charged that were never done. I see your name signed to orders that someone else approved." "Tell me what happened." Eleanor's father sank into his chair. For a long moment there was only the crackle of the fire. Then he began to speak. He told them about Mr. Lacy, the agent the old Duke had brought from London, a man with a soft voice and hard hands. Lacy had proposed a scheme to divert estate funds for investment, and when Edmund refused to sign the false entries, Lacy had forged his signature. By the time the old Duke discovered the discrepancies, Lacy had vanished and Edmund was the scapegoat. He was dismissed without reference, his pension withheld, his name blackened. No one in the county would hire him. The Duke listened without interruption. When the story was finished, he rose and walked to the window. His profile was sharp against the pale light. "Lacy, I found that name in the ledgers. He is still in the district, is he not? He manages the home farm now." Edmund nodded wearily. "He never left. He grew fat on what he stole." "Then he will answer for it." The Duke turned. "Mr. Ashby, I cannot restore the years you lost, but I can restore your reputation. I will need your help to do it. Will you give me all the documents you kept?" Eleanor saw the flicker of something, pride, or the ghost of it in her father's eyes. "I kept everything," he said. "Every letter, every account. I knew this day would come, or I prayed it would." Afterward, the Duke asked Eleanor to walk with him to the bridge. The rain had stopped, and the river ran high and silver under a pale sky. He stood at the edge of the broken span, the same place she had first seen him, but now he was not a stranger. He was a man carrying the weight of a ruined inheritance. "You spoke to me last night as if I were a common traveler," he said. "No deference, no fear." "I was afraid," she admitted, "not of your rank but of watching a man die." He looked at her. "I have spent 5 years in places where no one knew my name. It was easier. I am not certain I know how to be a duke, but I know how to listen, and you gave me the truth the moment we met. That is rare." Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded on the lane. Sir Reginald Finch rode up on a stout bay cob, his round face ruddy with displeasure. "Miss Ashby, your grace." He sketched a bow from the saddle that was barely civil. "I had not expected to find you here." The Duke's expression became unreadable. "Is there a matter that requires my attention, Sir Reginald?" "No matter, merely a neighborly call. I had hoped to speak with Miss Ashby privately." His eyes slid to Eleanor. "Regarding a matter we discussed last Sunday." Eleanor stiffened. Sir Reginald had proposed marriage to her 3 times in the past year, each time with more impatience. He offered security, a house, a position. She had refused him each time, and each refusal had made him more persistent. "I am engaged at present," she said. "His Grace wished to inspect the bridge." "So I see." Sir Reginald's smile did not warm his face. "I shall call another time. Your Grace, I trust you will find Ashworth to your liking. Some of us have worked hard to keep it respectable during your absence." He rode off, leaving a chill behind him. The Duke watched him go. "Is he a friend of yours?" "He wishes to be more than a friend." "And you?" "I wish him to be neither." The Duke said nothing, but something shifted in his face, a softening at the corners of his eyes. He offered her his arm. "Then I will walk you home, and I will call on you again tomorrow if I may." She took his arm. The wool of his sleeve was rough against her palm, and his warmth seeped through. As they walked, she felt the village watching from windows and doorways, and she knew that by morning the gossip would spread like fire through dry grass. Over the following fortnight, the Duke of Ashworth came to the cottage nearly every day. Sometimes he brought documents for Edmund Ashby to examine. Sometimes he brought a book for Eleanor, or a posy of early violets wrapped in damp paper. He sat in their small parlor and drank tea from chipped cups, and he listened. The bridge repairs began. The Duke hired local laborers and worked alongside them, stripping off his coat and hauling stones until his shirt was soaked with sweat. The villagers, who had expected an absentee lord, began to speak of him with something approaching warmth. Eleanor watched him change. The guarded stillness remained, but it no longer seemed like armor. It was more like patience, the quiet of a man who had learned to wait for the right moment. She brought bread and cheese to the work site one afternoon and found him alone, standing in the half-rebuilt arch with his hands on his hips, surveying the work. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his forearms dusted with stone grit. "You will ruin your hands," she said. He turned, and the smile he gave her was unguarded boyish. They were soft. A duke's hands should know what it costs to build something. She handed him a cloth-wrapped bundle. "You forgot to eat again. You are becoming my conscience, Miss Ashby." They sat on a fallen block of stone and shared the bread. The river rushed beneath them, and a dipper bobbed on a rock, its white breast flashing. He told her about his years abroad, about the loneliness of cities where no one knew his language, about the letters from home that never came. "My father and I quarreled before I left," he said. "I was angry, he was stubborn. I thought there would be time to reconcile, but there never was. The last letter I received was from his solicitor, informing me that I was the Duke of Ashworth and that the estate was in disrepair. I should have come home immediately. I did not." "Why not?" "Cowardice." He looked at the water. "I did not want to face what he had left behind, and I did not want to face the life that was waiting for me." "What life is that?" He hesitated. "My aunt, Lady Prudence Montford, arrived yesterday. She made it clear that I am expected to marry Lady Cecilia Harwood before the summer ends. The betrothal was arranged when I was a child. I have never met the lady, but the alliance is politically significant, and my aunt believes the estate's fortunes depend on it." Eleanor felt the bread turn dry in her mouth. "Then you will marry her." "I have spent my life avoiding duty. Perhaps it is time I learned what it means." He looked at her, and his gray eyes held something raw and unguarded. "But I find myself wishing I had come home sooner, before there were obligations I could not escape." She could not speak. He reached out and touched her hand, a brush of his fingers against her knuckles, and the contact burned through her like a struck match. "Eleanor," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name. The moment shattered with the sound of running footsteps. One of the laborers came pounding down the lane. "Your Grace, the scaffold has slipped. A boy is trapped under the rubble at the North Pier." The Duke was on his feet instantly. He ran, and Eleanor ran after him. They found the boy pinned beneath a fallen beam, his leg twisted and his face white with shock. The Duke knelt in the mud and lifted the beam with his bare hands while others pulled the child free. He carried the boy to the cottage himself, shouting for a surgeon. Eleanor stayed to help bind the wound. Later, when the surgeon had come and the boy was sleeping, she found the Duke outside, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. His hands were bleeding. She took them in hers and wrapped them in strips of clean linen, and he let her. Neither spoke. When she finished, he lifted one bandaged hand and touched her cheek. "I cannot promise you anything," he said hoarsely, "but I have never met anyone like you, and I do not know how I am supposed to walk away." Before she could answer, a carriage rolled into the yard. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, tall, silver-haired, dressed in black silk. Lady Prudence Montford's eyes swept over the scene. The Duke's hands in Eleanor's, the intimacy of their stance, and her expression chilled. "Alexander," she said, "we must speak. Immediately. Lady Prudence did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She sat in the Duke's study at Ashworth Hall, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and dismantled Eleanor's world with surgical precision. The girl's father was dismissed for theft. The village has long memories. If you continue this association, the Harwoods will withdraw from the engagement. The alliance that your father spent years cultivating will collapse. The estate is already in debt. Without Lady Cecilia's dowry, you will be forced to sell the home farm. And that, Alexander, is only the beginning. The Duke stood by the window, his back to her. The charges against Edmund Ashby were false. I have proof. Proof that will require a public inquiry, dragging your father's name through the mud. Is that how you wish to begin your tenure as Duke? By exposing your own family's corruption? He turned. My father's corruption is not my shame to carry, but his victims are my responsibility. Lady Prudence's smile was thin. Noble sentiments, but I did not travel all this way to watch you throw away your future for a steward's daughter. There is something you do not know, Alexander, something about your mother. The room went cold. Eleanor, waiting in the parlor, heard nothing. She only knew that when the Duke emerged, his face was gray. He told her later in the garden where no one could hear. His voice was flat. My aunt claims that my mother's marriage to my father was never legally valid. There is a document, she says, an affidavit signed by a witness who swore my mother was already married to another man when she wed the Duke. If the document is genuine, I am illegitimate. I have no right to the title, and Lady Prudence will make it public unless I marry Lady Cecilia and silence the scandal. Eleanor's heart was a stone in her chest. What will you do? I do not know. He looked at her with an anguish that cut deeper than words. If I lose the title, I lose everything, the estate, the ability to help your father, the power to make anything right. But if I marry Lady Cecilia, I lose you. She wanted to tell him to choose himself, to secure his name and his future. The words would not come. She had not realized until that moment how much she had allowed herself to hope. I need to go to London, he said, to find the truth. If the document is a forgery, I can expose my aunt's scheme, but it will take time. Then go. He caught her hands. Wait for me. I know I have no right to ask, but wait. She did not promise. She could not. She watched him ride away, and the days that followed were a slow unraveling. Sir Reginald came to the cottage with a proposal wrapped in kindness. Marry him, he said, and he would ensure her father had a comfortable home and a physician to treat his worsening cough. Eleanor refused politely and watched his face harden. You think the Duke will marry you, he said, his voice ugly. He will not. He will do what men of his station always do, and when he is finished with you, you will have nothing. She closed the door on him and leaned against it, shaking. A letter came from London. The Duke's handwriting was sharp and hurried. He wrote that he had found evidence that Lacy and Lady Prudence were working together, that the affidavit was a fabrication, but proving it would require testimony from a witness who had fled to France. He did not know when he could return. He asked her to trust him. She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the embroidered glove. The next week, a notice appeared in the county newspaper. The engagement of the Duke of Ashworth to Lady Cecilia Harwood was announced, with the wedding set for August. Eleanor read it 3 times. Then she walked to the bridge, which was now whole again, its new stones pale against the old. She stood where she had stood on the night of the storm, and she allowed herself to weep. The governess position was in Yorkshire, far enough away that no one would know her name. Eleanor packed her small trunk and wrote a letter to her father's cousin, who had agreed to take him in. The cottage would be empty by the end of the month. On her last afternoon, she walked to the bridge. The sun was low, streaking the river with gold. She had come to say goodbye to the place where her life had changed. She heard hoofbeats and turned. He rode the same black gelding, but he was not the exhausted stranger she had met in the rain. He was thinner, his face lined with sleepless nights, and his eyes burned with a desperate light. He dismounted before the horse had stopped moving. "You are leaving." It was not a question. He had seen the cart piled with their belongings. "The newspaper announced your engagement." "My aunt announced it. I did not consent. I have spent 3 weeks in London gathering evidence, and I have unmade every scheme she wove." He stepped closer. "The affidavit was forged. Lacey confessed. My mother's marriage was legal, and my aunt's conspiracy has been exposed. She is returning to her dower house in disgrace, and I am free." Eleanor's breath caught. "Then why did the announcement appear?" "Because I allowed it until I could return and explain everything to you myself. I wanted to tell you face to face." His voice broke. "I have broken the betrothal. The Harwoods are furious, but they will survive. I have also broken with every expectation that society placed on me. I do not care. I care only that you are standing here, and I am terrified that I am too late." She could not speak. He took her hands, and his grip was warm and solid. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the moment you stood in the rain and told me the truth. I do not need a political alliance. I do not need a dowry. I need you. Will you marry me, Eleanor Ashby?" The world seemed to hold its breath. The river rushed, the dipper sang, and somewhere in the village, a church bell began to toll the hour. She looked at his face, at the vulnerability beneath the commanding exterior, at the man who had carried a child from the rubble and knelt in the mud and asked her father for forgiveness. She thought of the glove she had kept all these weeks, the crest of the falcon and coronet, and how she had known, even then, that this stranger would unmake her life. "Yes," she whispered, "yes." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and the kiss tasted of salt and relief, and a future she had not dared to imagine. When they broke apart, he was laughing, and she was too, and the sound carried over the water like a promise. Then they heard hoofbeats again, sharp and urgent. A rider came galloping down the lane, a young man in the Duke's livery, his horse lathered. He reined in and thrust a paper into the Duke's hand. "Your Grace, you must read this at once. Lady Prudence has filed a petition with the ecclesiastical court. She is challenging your legitimacy before the bishop. She claims you have no right to the title, and she has brought a new witness." The Duke's face turned to stone. He read the paper, and Eleanor saw his jaw tighten. "Who is the witness?" he asked. "A woman who claims to have been present at your mother's first marriage. She has sworn an affidavit in front of a magistrate. The hearing is set for 3 weeks from now." Eleanor took his arm. "Then we will face it together." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the fear and the fury and the iron resolve. "If I lose, I will have nothing to offer you. No title, no estate, no name." "I did not say yes to the Duke of Ashworth," she said steadily. "I said yes to you." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned to the messenger. "Ride back and instruct my solicitor to prepare a defense. I will be in London within the week, and tell him to find everything he can about this new witness. Every connection, every debt, every secret. If my aunt wants a war, she shall have one." The rider wheeled his horse and was gone. The Duke took Eleanor's hand and lifted it to his lips. "I meant what I said on this bridge the first night we met. I owe you a debt. I intend to spend the rest of my life repaying it." They walked back to the cottage together, and though the future was uncertain, Eleanor felt a quiet steadiness settle in her chest. She had warned a stranger about a broken bridge. She had not known that she was warning her own heart. The hearing was held in the bishop's consistory court in London, a wood-paneled chamber that smelled of dust and old paper. Eleanor sat in the gallery, her hands folded in her lap, while lawyers in powdered wigs argued over the validity of a marriage that had taken place 35 years before. Lady Prudence's witness was a woman named Mrs. Hester Crane, a former lady's maid who claimed to have served the Duke's mother. She testified that she had witnessed a secret wedding between the late Duchess and a naval officer, a marriage that was never annulled. If true, the Duchess's subsequent marriage to the old Duke was bigamous, and Alexander Montford was illegitimate. The Duke's barrister, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Harrow, rose to cross-examine. He produced letters, parish registers, a naval record showing that the alleged first husband had died at sea 2 years before the Duchess ever met the Duke. He presented a sworn statement from the officer's own sister, who testified that her brother had never married anyone. Then he called an unexpected witness. Lacey, the former agent, shuffled to the stand, pale and sweating. Under oath, he confessed that Lady Prudence had paid him to locate a woman willing to perjure herself. Mrs. Crane was the widow of a debtor. She had been promised a cottage and an annuity. The affidavit was a tissue of lies. Lady Prudence sat rigid in her seat, her silver head high. When the bishop declared the petition dismissed and the Duke's legitimacy confirmed, she rose and walked out without a word. Eleanor never saw her again. They were married in the chapel at Ashworth Hall on a golden morning in September. The Duke wore a coat of dark gray velvet, and Eleanor wore ivory silk that had belonged to his mother, altered to fit her by the village seamstress. The bridge gleamed in the distance, its pale new stones a testament to everything that had been mended. Edmund Ashby gave her away, his eyes wet, his shoulders straight for the first time in a decade. The village turned out in its Sunday best, and Mrs. Tippet the baker wept into her handkerchief. After the ceremony, they walked to the bridge. The Duke, her husband now, stopped at the highest point of the arch and drew her to his side. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his coat and withdrew the chestnut riding glove, the one she had returned to him on the day they met. "You gave this back to me once. I want you to keep it now, to remember that you saved me, not just from the river." She took the glove, her throat tight. "I was only doing what anyone would do." "No, you were doing what you do. You see what is broken and you warn people before they fall." He cupped her face in his hands. "You have made me whole. This estate, this title, this life, I did not want any of it until you showed me what it could mean." He kissed her as the sun broke through the clouds, and the river sparkled beneath them, and the dipper flew from its rock in a flash of white. In the years that followed, the Duchess of Ashworth became known throughout the county as a woman of quiet strength and fierce compassion. She established a school in the village, a fund for widows, a lending library in the hall's east wing. The Duke, freed from the shadows of his father's legacy, became a voice in Parliament for the reform of estate laws that had allowed corruption to flourish. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and they told them the story of the broken bridge so often that the children knew it by heart. How their mother had stood in the rain and shouted a warning to a stranger. How their father had stopped his horse and listened. How a single moment of courage had built a life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood on the bridge at sunset, and the Duke slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking," he said, "that I am still that stranger, and you are still the woman who tells me the truth, and I will never stop being grateful that you called out." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The bridge was firm beneath their feet, the river ran clear below, and the hall glowed golden on the ridge. The storm was only a memory now, but its gift endured, a love that had begun with a warning and would last long after the stones themselves had worn away.